Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Conservative Party suspended 14 members yesterday for allegedly making Islamophobic comments after abusive posts were uncovered on social media. Not for the first time we mentioned something on the programme, and then Downing Street and or Conservative Central Office take action a couple of hours later. Happens on the other side of the fence as well. Jeremy Corbyn getting very exercised about that school that had to close early on Fridays after we discussed it on the programme, apparently missing the fact that it had already happened up and down the country to sundry other schools as well. He's probably too busy at the moment trying to justify apparent evidence that the leadership's office interfered in anti-Semitism cases, or he'll be desperately trying to make excuses for his undergraduate fanboys and girls who've just been found to be in breach of electoral laws. Momentum. Probably more to do with incompetence than corruption, that, but, you know, we are where we are. The story that really surprised me yesterday, and actually I wonder, I think I'm all right. I think I'm immune from criticisms of this, because I don't think anyone would ever accuse me of having contributed to all the invitations from the media for you to be rude about people just because they're Muslims. Oh, if you want evidence of that, because I'm afraid we do have to acknowledge some responsibility for this because of our own social media presence. Sadiq Khan will be here tomorrow to answer your questions. If you go to the LBC Facebook page or Twitter feed, then you'll see all the people I've blocked, so I don't really see it anymore. But the scale of Islamophobia that emerges even on something as innocuous as a radio phone-in is breathtaking. I don't know how many of the people who pop up on the LBC Facebook pages would also be popping up on the Facebook page dedicated to fandom of Jacob Rees-Mogg. It was one Jacob Rees-Mogg Facebook group that included calls for all Muslims to be turfed out of public office, for the government to get rid of all mosques, for the Muslim Home Secretary Sajid Javid to be outed as a Trojan horse. We also know that a council candidate, again, we mentioned this yesterday, Peter Lamb, who had been suspended over controversial comments about Muslims, was reinstated by his local Tory party in Harlow, Essex. He'd posted messages in 2015 saying that Islam was like alcoholism. The first step to recovery is to admit you have a problem. He was reinstated before the last round of council elections after apologising. I'm told that he's quit the party again after the row. 14-member suspensions. This is people who were members of the Conservative Party, according to BuzzFeed, have now been suspended. This Facebook group is in no way affiliated with the Conservative Party. I have here a statement from Jacob Britton. Of course I don't. Jeremy Corbyn is responsible for all the anti-Semitism that happens in the Labour Party or on social media sites that he may not even have visited, but they're dedicated to fandom of Jeremy Corbyn, therefore he is responsible for them. But a Facebook page that's actually dedicated to Jacob Rees-Mogg, no, nothing at all to see here. Except, of course, the question of why would people who are pants-down racists, Islamophobes and bigots, why would they like the look of Jacob Rees-Mogg, do you think? Do you remember when he accidentally went to dinner with the people that wanted to deport foreigners? Well, I mean, look, it's all very easy throwing stones in this business. Who here hasn't accidentally gone to dinner with a group that is publicly stating its desire to deport people of colour? Come on. People in glass houses should not throw stones, Keith. Who here hasn't been to a dinner accidentally? I mean, actually, regardless of whether you're accidentally having dinner with people that want to deport black men and women, who here hasn't accidentally been to dinner? It happens to us all the time. We give Jacob Rees-Mogg a very hard time sometimes. Who among us hasn't accidentally gone to dinner? You thought you were going swimming or 10-pin bowling, and you suddenly sort of came to as if you'd been in some sort of trance, and you were at dinner. Now you're at dinner with a bunch of racists, entirely by accident. We've all done it. I often find myself at dinner by accident. Only the other day I thought I was going to the football. I sort of woke up in the middle of the day, I was having lunch. It's incredible. We've all been to dinner by accident, and we've all accidentally had dinner with massive racists. So that's got nothing to do with the question of why so many Conservative members who style themselves as admirers of Jacob Rees-Mogg would feel comfortable and at home indulging in vile Islamophobia and racism on a Facebook page. Interesting question. Not the one we're going to answer. This is really, really tricky. I'm hoping to get Saeed Avasi into the studio to answer some of your questions about this, because she's been talking about this for ages, and there have been times where you've wondered if you're inhabiting a parallel universe. I think it's absolutely right for the Labour Party to be currently getting hauled over the coals, or actually, to be very specific, the Labour leadership and a lot of the Jeremy Corbyn loyalists really struggling with this anti-Semitism problem, because as we've explained on this programme before, they don't realise that what they're doing is anti-Semitic. They really do think the Jews run the world. They really do think the Jews run the media, so they don't think they're doing anything racist or bigoted or prejudiced or discriminatory when they say in public that the Jews run the media. They really do think that when you criticise the actions of the state of Israel, they really do think you get to criticise everyone in Israel, to criticise the country as a homogenous whole. Imagine if you, as a staunch Brexiter, were getting blamed by the rest of the world for the actions of Remainers. How would you feel? But that's what criticism of Israel is. Criticisms of policies pursued by certain parties and politicians used to castigate an entire country, an entire state. And of course, it often goes hand in hand with questions about the very legitimacy of that state. But we digress. Because I'm close to saying I feel sorry for these Conservative Party members, but before you shoot me down in flames, let me qualify what I mean by that. I think they will probably be looking at their suspensions this morning and not understanding why they've been suspended, because I for good or for ill, and I do my bit, I think you'd agree. So you're not going to say that I should be immersing myself in online racism and bigotry. I see my share, but I avoid it, you know. I block and mute on social media like it's going out of fashion. And I never go, for example, to our own Facebook page here at LBC. I see the stuff that comes in when Sadiq Khan is in the studio. I know that some of you feel that kind of vile abuse is encouraged or at least excused by some of my fellow presenters. That's your opinion. You're welcome to it. I acknowledge your view. I don't necessarily agree with it. But I see what comes in when Sadiq Khan is here, as he'll be here tomorrow. And I think to myself, well, I know what that looks like. Why would I need to go and have another look at it? But when I occasionally stumble across this kind of thing, you think the Labour Party's got a problem with anti-Semitism? That is David, to use a biblical analogy. The Conservative Party's problem with Islamophobia is Goliath, right? You know that the British media isn't really interested in holding the Conservatives to account for whatever reasons. I absolutely acknowledge and condemn the free pass that anti-Semitism still receives in many corners of the Labour Party. But if you really want to combine like with like, here is the utterly unjustified persecution of Jews. Here is the utterly unjustified persecution of Muslims. I'm really sorry, my dudes, but that's apples and pears. The Islamophobia that runs through the right wing of the United Kingdom, man, that's so deep. That's so deep, it's nudging the core of the earth. It runs so deep, and it's gone unchallenged for so long. Rod Liddell wrote in The Spectator not long ago, edited by Fraser Nelson, published by Andrew Neil, the scrupulously impartial soon-to-be former BBC presenter, that there isn't enough Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. So, if I said to you, who radicalised these Conservatives in such a way that they didn't realise what they were doing wrong when they took to a public forum to call for all mosques to be shut, all Muslims to be turfed out of public office, and worse, who radicalised them? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Because if you read The Spectator magazine, you'll know that there are more than one writer who routinely indulge in the sort of ideas that Rod Liddell has become well known for. There's not enough, in my opinion, he wrote, or in my view, there's not enough Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. And I think, didn't they recently host an event with Rees-Mogg at the Palladium that was chaired by the editor Fraser Nelson, who published Rod Liddell's argument that there's not enough Islamophobia in the Conservative Party? So I think what you need to do now is imagine, and I don't normally like what can be described as whataboutery, but actually we're living in a country so broken by false equivalence. We need to remind ourselves what real equivalence looks like. So the left-wing magazine that is often held up as a corrective to the right-wing nature of The Spectator, as with a lot of left-right correctives at the moment, it's bogus. Because if you say the New Statesman is 10 degrees to the left, The Spectator magazine is 247 degrees to the right. Some of its writers, most of its writers, certainly its editorial slant. Imagine if the New Statesman published an article by Owen Jones stating baldly that there is not enough anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. What would happen? Imagine if Diane Abbott or John McDonnell came forward with comments about Jewish women being like letterboxes, or made a joke about the wigs that Orthodox Jewish women wear. Made a joke that invited people to mock and condemn them. Imagine if John McDonnell made a joke about the wigs that Orthodox Jewish women wear, the locks that Orthodox Jewish men grow, or the yarmulkes that many, many, many Jewish men choose to wear. Imagine if, for example, John McDonnell said, "Why do all these Jews walk around with frisbees on their head?" Explain to me how that would be, substantively, any different from what Boris Johnson said about Muslim women's sartorial choices, the ones that make them look like letterboxes. Do you see what I mean? That's not even controversial, that comparison. Just imagine Owen Jones wrote an article about there not being enough anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and then tell me how the hell Rod Liddell gets to write an article arguing that there's not enough Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. And he'll still get invited onto programmes and into studios. And Andrew Neil can still claim, when he's covering these issues, that he's impartial. And Fraser Nelson can host an event at the London Palladium with Jacob Rees-Mogg, whose fans are so vile that 14 of them have been suspended from the very party. Now just swap all of those phrases. Swap Islamophobia for anti-Semitism. Swap Rod Liddell for Owen Jones. Swap Fraser Nelson for Jason Cowley over at the New Statesman. And swap Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson for John McDonnell or Tom Watson. And you tell me that we don't live in a country that is utterly upside down. So, the question is, 14 members of the Conservative Party suspended for posting Islamophobic or racist comments on social media. I will let you say whatever you want in answer to the question of who radicalised them. I'm really only interested in a way in talking to people who admit both problems. So if you deny that Labour, and Corbyn in particular, have a massive problem with anti-Semitism, then I think you're pretty close to being an anti-vaxxer in the context of yesterday's conversation about vaccines. And if you deny on the day that we learn that the Conservative Party has suspended 14 members after posting Islamophobic or racist comments on social media, if you deny that the Conservative Party has a problem with Islamophobia, then similarly, I don't know what's to be gained from us talking to each other. So if you acknowledge both problems, would you agree with me that oddly, given the coverage of both problems in most of the media, the right wing's fast tracking and amplification of Islamophobia dwarfs the left's problem with anti-Semitism? That's my cautious suggestion, and I'm not going to fight on that bridge. I might fight on it. I'm not going to die on it. All right. Wasn't there a Conservative MP who retweeted the former leader of the EDL? A Conservative, I think, I may need to check that. It's a good job I haven't mentioned any names. But do you see what I mean? Imagine if Diane Abbott asked why Jewish men walk around with frisbees on their heads. And now tell me how Boris Johnson gets away with saying that Muslim women look like letterboxes. 0345 6060 973. That's the astonishing thing. Imagine if Owen Jones wrote in the New Statesman that the Labour Party needs more anti-Semitism. But Rod Liddell writes in The Spectator that he thinks the Conservative Party needs more Islamophobia. Just explain this to me, because it's actually, now that we've managed to get it out in simple terms, it's actually quite scary. Imran's in Huddersfield. Imran, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, I'm a former Tory party member from small business family. I listen to people like David Cameron, Said Owasi, good people on the right, left of the party, joined up. So I'll play my part. Local mosque imam, very forthright.
Yes.
Proud British chaps that look, get involved. You know, we're proud Brits. My father came from Kenya, Uganda, always had British Empire passports, you know. And we're obviously proud we're British. Kids have got England football tops and go on all day. However, I got involved and I met some good people in the party and I met some secret Islamophobes, and it just got difficult.
That would be true. That would be true even if you joined a chess club or a gym, wouldn't it? If we're honest about this, I mean, we're focusing on the Conservative Party's problem with Islamophobia, partly as a corrective to coverage of the Labour Party's problem with anti-Semitism, but the idea that you could assemble 100 people anywhere, whether at a Conservative Party coffee morning or at a hockey match, you would have a percentage of anti-Semites, Islamophobes, racists in that company, wouldn't you?
I think the key difference is, very good point, James. I think the difference is that both main parties, in fact all three parties, are there to represent the electorate, are there to serve the public.
Oh, yes.
I'm calling now for an independent inquiry into hate crime in both main parties. Call it hate crime, call it bigotry, call it anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Semitism, call it what you will. But this kind of fermenting of hatred towards the other, towards minorities, it must stop. Because then we saw a sharp increase into Islamophobic hate crime when Boris Johnson started abusing Muslim women, and then we also.
Well, I don't have the numbers, and I don't have statistics in front of me, so I'm not going to query that. I'm just going to say I haven't got the evidence in front of me that that's true. I certainly think the rhetoric was ramped up after Boris Johnson's comments, but whether or not actual recorded crimes increased, I don't know off the top of my head. But that's by the by. What do you think as a Muslim about my analogy, my comparison there of?
You're bang on right. You bang on right.
The letterboxes versus the frisbees.
Yeah, you bang on right. There's absolutely no point in calling out, Tory anti-Muslim hatred, because I do not like the term Islamophobia. Doesn't do that the crime justice. Anti-Muslim hatred in the Conservative Party, any party, can only be called out if we do recognise there's a slight problem with certain members and certain supporters.
I disagree. I don't think it's slight. I think this is really. I mean, the Conservative Party only acted after the @MatesJacob Twitter account assembled all this evidence, and we amplified it live on the radio. It's arguable whether they'd have done anything if both of those things hadn't happened. If it was confined to a relatively small Twitter account, they might have looked the other way. But obviously, if we could talk about it on LBC, they either hear us or someone tells them. But this is a Jacob Rees-Mogg Facebook group, and it breaks my heart to say to you, it didn't even surprise me a tiny bit.
It's shocking. I think it's got to be called out on both parties. There's an anti-Semitism problem within certain parts of Labour, and there's an anti-Muslim hatred problem in the Conservative Party. So
which one's bigger? Hand on heart, as a former Tory member, and a former Tory candidate even, hand on heart, who's got the bigger issue? The Labour with anti-Semitism or Conservatives with anti-Muslim hatred?
See, I don't want to hazard a guess who's got a bigger problem.
Why not?
The key factor.
You follow events. I've hazarded a guess. I think the Conservatives have got a much bigger problem.
Honestly, mate, we need an independent inquiry. That's what we need.
Fair enough. You see, you might go far if you return to the political fray. I'm refusing to answer my relatively simple question, Imran. You're in extremely good company. It's coming up to 11:59. As I am Incorrigible, one of my favourite Twitter. If I said devotees, he'd take offence. So I'll say correspondence points out that if you're being praised by Steve Bannon, chances are that you are racist. Steve Bannon praises Boris Johnson, former Trump advisor, says MP has nothing to apologise for after Burqa remarks. And we know, don't we, that Bannon met with... No, did he meet with Boris Johnson? I know that he met with Jacob Rees-Mogg and the other fella. But Bannon, I think, and it's a miracle that this is considered to be insightful or helpful. You know what Steve Bannon does? I think Steve Bannon tells people, like Donald Trump or Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg, he says, no. Seriously, you're overestimating people. Listen to a radio phone-in. Listen to the stupidest, most ignorant right-wing caller that radio phone-in programme has ever taken, and then say what they want to hear. And it will, by a process of political osmosis, it will seep through into the mainstream until people will no longer trust the evidence of their own eyes. So it's a tough one, this. The comparisons of Islamophobia in the right wing, in the Tory party, and anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. One of the few silver linings of political homelessness at the moment, in party political terms, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, is very hard to feel enthusiasm for if you've got your eyes open and your brain working. But you can actually be genuinely objective in a way that all of us struggle to be a little bit in the context of tribalism. So I think the Labour Party's got a massive problem with anti-Semitism. I think the Tory Party's got a massive problem with anti-Muslim hatred. My cautious suggestion to you this afternoon, is that the Conservatives' problem is much bigger. And it's actually much more indicative of society as a whole. I'm using analyses and analogies and comparisons. I've asked if I can share this, which is coming from a friend of mine who's a rabbi. That's all I'll tell you. But I make comments comparing Boris Johnson's letterbox descriptor, and I then throw in a theoretical equivalent from a left-wing politician, what they might say about Jews that would be rude. It's reassuring to hear from a rabbi who says, I've got you on in the background, your point about Islamophobia is well made, which is reassuring to me. But you know what I do for a living is that I say stuff even if I might be hauled over the coals for it, if I think it's true. And there's no way, I think, you can argue with a straight face that the Labour Party's real and present problem with anti-Semitism is on anything like the scale of the Conservative Party's real and present problem with anti-Muslim hatred. But you're more than welcome to. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. It's 5 minutes after 12. Arthur is in Gloucester. Arthur, what would you like to say?
Well, I think, James, about this issue of radicalisation, one factor to look at, which hasn't really been talked about, is actually the misinformation and tracking back to what Russia is trying to do here. And so Russia has been doing this for decades, and they're experts at it, and they feed misinformation into the bloodstream because ultimately they see the sort of division in our society as something that's in their interest. And what's happening is stuff initiates in kind of fringe websites or Russian state media outlets, but then it's picked up.
It's a terrible phone line, Arthur. I'm going to try and fix it, and then we will come back to you. I think your analysis is clearly informed. Some people, it's worth pointing out, will groan at the mention of Russia, but they are, by definition, ill-informed. It's not very difficult to find out the effort that Russian actors have put into public debates on social media involving British people on everything from the MMR vaccine right through, in this case, to Islamophobia. So it starts off on an obscure website. It gets picked up. It's good business, Arthur. There's money to be made from whipping up anti-Muslim hatred. There's serious money to be made.
Absolutely. But I think, one of the things that strikes me is that when these mainstream people like The Spectator carry this rubbish, what they're actually doing is, playing to the agenda. And obviously they're not doing this consciously, but they're playing to the agenda, ultimately, of Vladimir Putin, which I find kind of ironic for what probably regards itself as a sort of highly patriotic outlet.
I don't know. The defence they always offer is that we publish all opinions, but I wonder if they would publish an opinion comparing yarmulkes to Frisbees or saying that there's not enough anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Arthur, the phone line has defeated us. I'm sorry about that. I would have liked to talk to you some more. There are some phone lines free, not least the one that Arthur has just vacated, 0345 606 0973. It's a big question, this, and I'm not going to apologise for failing to get to the absolute heart of it, because there isn't a heart of it. It's a contemplation, it's a meander, it's thinking out loud. And what I'm thinking right now is, I don't understand why Saeeda Varsi has been fighting such a lonely battle to highlight Islamophobia in her own party, when most of the British media has been, quite rightly, pursuing the anti-Semitism story in the Labour Party. You give me your reasons for those two, for that one apparently massive disparity, OK? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Craig's in Glasgow. Craig, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. What I would say that, first and foremost, I totally agree with you. There is a big problem in both parties. Islamophobia in the Tories and the anti-Semitism in Labour. And I think that, for me, the two big main problems with it is that, one, I feel like we've got leaders of both parties who, in many ways, seem sort of slightly more interested in point scoring with each other than actually dealing with the main issues of the party. I mean, I thought Tom Watson last week, the Deputy Leader of Labour, was absolutely excellent in what he was saying and what he's trying to do, and the fact that he's... And
he ends up getting into a scrap with the... is she the General Secretary of the Labour Party? I don't want to get the job description wrong, but he ends up... So people complain that their complaints about anti-Semitism haven't been properly processed. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party stands up and says, well, if you have got any concerns that they're not being properly processed, come and see me. And then the people charged with properly processing them kick off and throw their dummies out of the pram. And Jeremy Corbyn just sits there going, hey,
exactly.
Homelessness is awful.
That's something that, it's an incompetence. I think where the Tory side of things is concerned, and the Islamophobia, again, I agree with you, I think it is a bigger issue because it's been an issue that's been much longer standing. And the problem with it for me is the mainstream media contribute massively. You look at ITV, Sky News, and particularly the BBC, or British Broadcasting Conservatives, as I like to call them, because as much as they try and say that they maintain impartiality, you look at last week, with the anti-Semitism, rightly, they call it out, but they are all over Labour like a rash when the slightest thing happens. But when the Tories have massive issues with Islamophobia and other things, it's not the same. Just last week in Question Time, in a week where the Tories once again, Theresa May, showed their incompetence, it's Barry Gardiner, the Labour MP, who got an absolute battering on Question Time. And that is the problem. It has to be called out equally on both sides. You can't have mainstream media deciding that they're going to call it out more on one side than the other, and then when Boris Johnson makes remarks about letterboxes, almost laughing it out because it's it's just Boris. Well, he should have been suspended for the Tory party for that. Why is he immune to being suspended?
Well, that's why I sometimes throw these things out there. I never do it carelessly, but I am conscious of the ones that are potentially difficult. And this idea that if Owen Jones wrote a piece for the New Statesman saying that there's not enough anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, the reaction would be very, very different from Rod Little writing an article for the Spectator saying that there's not enough Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Vicky's asked, where is, share your evidence that you suggest Islamophobia is more of a problem in the Tory Party than anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. But that would be part of it, Vicky. And similarly, the fact that the Tories have suspended 14 members and there aren't examples of MPs or council leaders being suspended or caught out sharing stuff from people who don't even pretend not to be far right, but it is just a suggestion. I don't want to turn it into top trumps. I don't want to have an argument about whose problem is bigger. But if you want to understand the point I made more properly, it would be the question of coverage. So regardless of which problem is bigger, I think we can all agree that anti-Semitism in the Labour Party has received a lot more coverage than Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. And the evidence of that, I'm afraid you're going to have to find for yourself. It'll take you about 3 seconds. There's a problem here, Craig, because I sit here as someone who works in the media, and I think I've almost been gaslit over the years. I mean, one blocks and mutes on social media, but still, when Sadiq comes in, when Sadiq Khan is in the studio, the stuff that breaks through even my quality filters on my personal accounts, and I don't go near the LBC account on days like that, I've become normalised to it. And if that was stuff about Jews, I'd probably have called the police.
Oh, you would. That's the thing, and I think it's shameless. That those on the right, and particularly the far right, will all day long, call out anti-Semitism and have as many digs at Corbyn and Labour and say you're shocking, this has to be dealt with and all the rest of it. But we'll also find it quite happy to crack on with Islamophobia. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is a man who he's made mistakes, but he has received a disproportionate amount of criticism, I think, mainly because of his ethnicity and the fact that he is a Muslim man, and I think it's disgraceful.
And the bigots, of course, who abuse him wouldn't actually deny that. That's why, and I use the words very cautiously, I feel not sorry for these 14 people who have been suspended, but whatever the word I need to use now is, that's what I feel about them, because they could realistically say, but why am I being suspended from the Conservative Party? And what I said isn't that different from what Rod Liddle writes in The Spectator or what Boris Johnson writes in the Daily Telegraph. Why have I been suspended from the Conservative Party? Have you seen what people send to LBC when Sadiq Khan is on? Why have I been suspended from the Conservative Party? No one told me I wasn't allowed to do this stuff. Some of my political heroes do it. Anyway, this is a Jacob Rees-Mogg fan page. Surely if we were doing something wrong, he would have got involved, told us to stop doing this under his name. And then I find myself wondering what would happen if a left-wing journalist wrote an article saying that there's not enough anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, or that Jewish women who wear wigs because of their religious observance, I'm not going to do a joke about them. I'm not made that way. I went for comparing the yarmulke to the frisbee, which I hope hasn't offended anybody. The intention, of course, was the opposite, but I can't do it. That's why Boris Johnson gets paid a hell of a lot more for his newspaper columns than I do for mine. I won't do lazy race baiting. And also, I wouldn't be anywhere near as good at it as he is. Just trying to make my point with comparisons. Do you remember the leaflet that came out during the mayoral campaign? Was aimed at British Indians in particularly. And the claim made by Zach Goldsmith was that a vote for Sadiq Khan would put their family heirlooms at risk. These were leaflets sent out in Goldsmith's name that appeared to warn Indian voters in the city that a vote for Khan could put their family jewellery at risk. It said Goldsmith would stand up for the British Indian community by getting police to focus on protecting family homes from burglary, whereas Khan's party supported a wealth tax on family jewellery. It also said that Khan posed a risk for London's future because he had not attended the UK welcome rally for Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, at Wembley Stadium last year. I'm not going to reach too far to do a comparison on that and imagine what would have happened if Sadiq Khan had made similar suggestions about Zach Goldsmith, who is, of course, a Jewish lad. But I am sticking with some of my comparisons here and asking what would happen if a left-wing journalist wrote an article for a left-wing newspaper or magazine claiming that there's not enough anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, which is what Rod Liddle did about Islamophobia in the Spectator magazine. And then try these on for size. These are... No, actually, I'll tell you where they're from. Imagine if we swap the word Muslim for Jew, or I'll tell you what words to swap. So Daily Express, Muslim schools ban our culture. That will be because they are following religious guidelines in their own schools, which some Jewish schools do. Imagine a headline in the Express that said Jewish schools ban our culture. Daily Express, give us full Sharia law. Give us full Talmudic law. I don't know what the right phrase is. Jewish plot to kill Pope. No, Muslim plot to kill Pope. Christianity under attack from Muslims. How about this one? Britain goes halal. Try on Britain goes kosher. As far as I'm aware, the veterinary requirements are almost identical. It never ends, really. It never ends. Now Muslims get their own laws in Britain, says the Express. Millions are eating halal food without knowing it. Swap Muslims for Jews, swap halal for kosher. And tell me where the differences lie. Because this is... I don't know why we haven't talked about this more. I think I've been groomed. I've been gaslit. It's a bit like, I can get over that hill. It's going to be tough, but I can get to the top of it. And although I won't be able to take everybody with me, we'll know what the top looks like. You look at Islamophobia in the British media industry and British political circles, you just think, I'm never going to get to the top of that mountain. It's too big. And to my shame, I wonder whether I've bottled the fight as a result. And only when you see the 14 Conservative members suspended today for saying stuff that I see every single day, do you realise just how much damage has already been done to our community by people who would seek to divide us? Jonathan's in Archway. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I just wanted to try and point out the way that the anti-Islam feelings now, they seem to remind me a lot of anti-Semitism years and years back in the 1920s and 30s. When you read history, and sadly when you look at the same papers, the Express and the Daily Mail, they were moaning about the Jews and the way that the Jews were invading and pouring in, and look at the general environment. The things like the Mosley's fascists and the Cable Street riots were all overtly anti-Semitic, almost turned into pogroms. But that, in those days, the Jews were the most recent, maybe the most visually obvious immigrants, and they didn't speak English, and they looked funny, they smelled funny, and they were an easy scapegoat. So sadly, today we found somebody else.
Some people have found somebody else. I think one thing we haven't even mentioned is anti-Semitism in the Conservative Party, and this is perhaps unfairly. When people ask me about this, I often say, the problem for Labour is that you don't expect to find bigotry and prejudice in the Labour Party. Rightly or wrongly, many people do expect to find it in the Conservative Party, but the Conservatives will have their own problems with anti-Semitism, which may prove to be comparable in scale to the problems that the Labour Party have got.
I'm sure they do, and I'm sure they still have a lot of, the UK in general has a lot of fairly broad stereotypes about Jews, but they just may not necessarily be all that negative. The idea is that Jews are rich.
And that is why one of the analyses of the Labour Party's problem with anti-Semitism is that the Jewish community is not perceived as needing protection. So this slightly paternalistic liberalism that would say, well, they're not an oppressed minority. They're a whatever minority, but they're not oppressed. They don't need our help. And that, of course, is where madness lies. That's where all the horrors can come from. I asked Tony Blair about this in my interview with him that is a part of my new podcast series, Full Disclosure. I'd forgotten, actually. I'm just looking at a clip now that LBC have posted where he tells me that Jeremy Corbyn has put out a welcome mat for anti-Semites. And that will be controversial for a former Labour leader to say that. But what is Boris Johnson, if not laying out a welcome mat for anti-Muslim hatred when he talks about letterboxes and bank robbers? Do you know, I couldn't remember what the other thing was. I knew it was worse than letterboxes. So they look like bank robbers. And The Spectator continues to publish Rod Liddell, who boasts about wanting to see more Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Oh, boy. Jonathan, thank you. Dave's in the Isle of Wight. Hello, Dave.
Hello there, James. This is the first time I phoned you up. Just say I really, really like your show. It's fantastic.
You're very welcome. I completely agree. What would you like to contribute to it?
Well, what I'd like to say is that on the Isle of Wight, I have a couple of Conservative friends, and they are deeply horrified about the Islamophobia, and indeed deeply horrified about Boris Johnson.
Yes.
They're not fans of his at all, and they do recognise that there is an issue, and has been an issue for quite some time. I mean, I won't say who they are, but they're quite senior in the local Conservative circles. And,
good. No, you don't have to. The Labour Party's full of people who are Republican. You've got Tony Blair there telling me in this interview that Jeremy Corbyn has laid out a welcome mat for anti-Semitism, and it breaks his heart. Both parties will contain, hopefully, a preponderance of people who are equally repulsed by these kind of bigotries.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely sure that is the case. I mean, I've had long and detailed conversations with this quite senior Conservative chap on the island, and he's saying, look, I don't recognise my party.
Well, that's odd then. I mean, it's not odd because he's right, and I think I recognise his analysis. But in terms of what my profession has done, you'd almost not know there was a problem with anti-Muslim hatred in the Tory party, and yet anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is headline news, has been for months.
I completely concur with you, actually. The thing that worries me the most is this constant drumbeat of papers like the Daily Express and the Mail. And I have to lay my cards on the table. I was a journalist until a month ago when I got made redundant.
I'm sorry to hear that.
No, don't worry about it. It's okay. There's this constant drumbeat. If you look at some of the below-the-line comments in Daily Express stories, for instance...
Well, I'm afraid LBC are very culpable of this as well.
Extraordinary how they're actually allowing to do it. I mean, I've actually...
Well, it's not even allowing. It's commercial organisations. It costs costs a lot of money to moderate this stuff.
Yes,
so the BBC will spend it, but any money that the Express spends on moderating a Facebook page is money that comes out of the profits.
Exactly, it's next to zero. And I mean, the allowance of these comments, I mean, some of them you just sit there and think to yourself, my God, do you know what you're actually saying?
And that's why, for want of a better word, I keep saying that. What's the word I want? I don't feel sorry for these 14 Tory members, but I feel something akin to what you're describing, because they will be sitting there this morning going, how have I been suspended from the Conservative Party? I see this 5,000 times. Just go to the LBC Facebook page. Have a look at some of the comments tomorrow when Sadiq Khan is in the studio. Why am I getting punished? Everybody's doing it. Everyone I know does it, they're saying this morning.
I'm not saying that every single person who comments at BTL at the Daily Express is a member of the Conservative Party. That's a ridiculous thing to say, and it's probably not true as well. But
they lean to the right. It's probably fair to say.
Definitely they lean to the right. Of course they lean to the right. They dress to the right. It's a very scary world that we live in right now, when you're entitled to say that kind of thing and nobody pulls you up on it.
No.
Nobody pulls you up on it. You just sit there and think, my God, some of the stuff you hear about Sadiq Khan just is beyond belief, quite frankly.
Yes, of course it is. And I think I've been gaslit by it. I think I think a lot of people in my profession have probably just been almost steamrollered by the scale of it.
I agree.
Whereas anti-Semitism is man bites dog. Yeah. That's shocking. Anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it repulses me and disgusts me and shocks me. Racism in the racism on the right wing, whatever.
I know, and whatever is a really bad response.
I know it is.
It's like sort of shrugging your shoulders and saying, oh yeah, that's the Tories. And I mean, it's not the Tories, at least not the Tories who are friends of mine who I know. And I have to lay my cards on the table. I'm a Labour Party supporter, not a member. But I was at university in Manchester during the 1980s when there was a very left-wing feel to the Manchester University Students' Union. And there was a big Jewish community who went to university at Manchester, and they kind of pointed out to me, actually, that a lot of these people are anti-Semite unconsciously. Yes. And I think that's what, had happened when the hard left took over, because they couldn't quite compute the idea that Jewish people were victims of racism as well.
No, it was 10 years later for me, but oddly enough in the same city with friends I had from Manchester Grammar School, and I'd left a Catholic boarding school. I'd never had Jewish friends before. I didn't really know about such matters, and they would occasionally point out stuff to me that was just lazy anti-Semitism. And of course that is part of what's taken root in the Labour Party. I thank you very much for that, Dave. I was trying to rack my brains for the name of the hotel on the Isle of Wight that a friend of mine is trying to get me to sign a petition to stop the development of, just in order to make connections across the country as we continue to lead Britain's conversation, but it currently eludes me. 28 minutes after 12. I'm proud of how this conversation is going. Some people will no doubt be upset because you can't talk about these issues without upsetting someone. But if you look at... I don't see anti-Semitism unless I go looking for it, right? Even if I were to open the lid on the LBC feed, which I haven't looked at since the middle of last year, if I'm brutally honest with you, but even if I were, there's not... People don't feel emboldened in public to say stuff about Jews, They do feel emboldened in public to say stuff about Muslims. And if you ask why, you would have to be living in cloud cuckoo land not to conclude that the public pronouncements of people like Boris Johnson, who knows exactly what he's doing and did meet with Steve Bannon last year and has subsequently doubled down on the hurling of red meat to some of the vilest corners of our country, there has to be a link. And then you see it, not in kind of lazily photocopied hate sheets handed out in the back room of an East End pub, but when you see in the Spectator magazine, the house journal of the British establishment, a man who writes for the Sunday Times and the Sun as well as the Spectator, talking about how there's not enough Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. How do you then rationalise getting suspended for Islamophobia from the Conservative Party? So I only see anti-Semitism from the left or the right when I go looking for it or when it's shown to me. All I have to do to see anti-Muslim hatred from mostly the right wing is stick my head out the metaphorical window. I could be buried in it by tea time. How have we allowed this to happen? I think the best way to illustrate the point I was trying to make about Israel and anti-Semitism and the Labour Party is a broad generalisation. Most people who see themselves as hardcore pro-Palestinian activists, okay, and that is the phrase they would use to counter perhaps some accusations of anti-Semitism. So I was chatting to Ricky Gervais yesterday at length about it's the next episode of my new podcast series, and Gervais, as you know, is a very, very, very frontline advocate of freedoms in the context of speech and comedy, and what might offend somebody else is not just necessary but important in the protection of those freedoms. We're not quite on the same page, although I felt myself moving a little bit closer to his position at one point in particular in the interview when he just said, what's the point of trying to be a better person if you're going to get held to account on stuff you did 10 years ago? I think we referred briefly to Kevin Hart, the American comedian who withdrew from presenting the Oscars after homophobic tweets that were 8 years old emerged. And I hadn't thought of it like that before. I'm a big fan of trying to be a better person. For me, it's largely the whole point of being alive. And that notion and I have felt a degree of discomfort with some of the retrospective judging of people, but I've never held it as well articulated as it was yesterday. I forgot what I was telling you about Ricky Gervais now. I've gone off on a tangent. I've got to stop doing that. I'm fine up until 12:30. I can go on off a tangent and haul it straight back again. I never lose sight of anything. After 12:30, maybe I should start having some nuts and seeds during the 12:30 news, some brain food. But I was chatting to him about lots and lots of things yesterday, and that idea that you should be forgiven for what you said 8 years ago is important. But when the point I wanted to make about Israel and anti-Semitism, that was why I was mentioning Ricky Gervais. It's important to have uncomfortable conversations, even though we now live in a climate where people will be desperately trying to find something to hit me over the head with in the context of what we've been talking about now, regardless of what, quote, side you think you're on. So presumably I'm upsetting a small number of people from every community and constituency, and that's important. I have to do that. So I think I can help understand the difficulty some Labour supporters have in understanding why they are being accused of anti-Semitism. And I'm going to loosely presume that if you're a massive fan of Jeremy Corbyn, you were against the Iraq war, okay? I don't care. I'm going to treat you, talk to you, and despise you just as if you dropped the bombs yourself. And that's why criticism of Israel, as opposed to policies pursued by Likud or policies pursued by the Israeli government or things done by the Israeli army, is anti-Semitic. Because if I held you responsible for the Gulf War, even though you were opposed to it, marched against it, voted against it, argued against it, you'd feel a little bit aggrieved, right? Yeah. So that's why Israel does not equal Jew. Get it? Good. Why does the problem the Conservative Party have with anti-Muslim hatred, meanwhile, attract a fraction of the attention that the Labour Party's problem with anti-Semitism attracts? Your thoughts on this? Joseph is in Lightwater. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Well, coming back to the question of where were these people radicalised that you put?
Yes.
I think the answer is, to a great degree, they were groomed by the mainstream media on the right-wing side, the Mail, the inaccurate stories they do. There's people that force them to do regular collectors, but they're never as prominent.
Yes.
And the Express as well, as you mentioned. He came onto them after I said cool.
Yes.
And then that is deepened, and this applies also on the left, that they get into it in a different way, by social media, YouTube and things. YouTube will deepen. The algorithm's designed to make you watch more. So they show you things that go deeper into whatever you're watching. If you're watching stuff about model trains, that's not so harmful.
Well, the business model is to keep you there for as long as possible. But I don't know I don't know enough about this. I know that what you describe is accurate, but I would not have previously thought that a 55-year-old Conservative Party member in the Shires was spending a lot of time watching Islamophobic videos on YouTube. I don't know, though. Maybe they are.
I mean, it also might start in Facebook as well. That has similar things.
I'd have said Facebook for that generation and that category of Conservative member was probably more... I mean, it was a Facebook group. I've been a bit unfair to Jacob Rees-Mogg. There's a Boris Johnson fan group as well that a Conservative councillor has been forced to step down after being found to be moderating a Boris Johnson supporters Facebook group that was calling for black people to be set on fire. So Facebook more than YouTube for the older...
But even there,
hate
it's a link to a video on YouTube that then can go off into this route and things. I think I was really frustrated.
Of course, yes, of course. You click on a Facebook link and it takes you straight to YouTube. You watch the video on YouTube and it says, well, if you like this vile bigotry, here's loads more.
Yeah, the report from the Select Committee that came out the same Monday as the TIG's departure was utterly buried. I think you were on holiday.
Yes.
But that is really important stuff. And it needs to... It's a shame it's been so lost in the weeds of this.
Lost in the noise. And also deliberately ignored, because a lot of people in power won't like what it contains, will they? Won't like what it delivers.
Yeah, and so the different routes in. I mean, on the left, it might be campaigning for Palestinians not to get shot. That leads you into places that then get deeper into more murky territory, shall we say.
Yes.
And on the right, there's mainstream press legitimising it so that they can say, look, this is right, it was in the Daily Mail, and then the correct...
Well, look, I mean, 1 in 5 Brit Muslims sympathy for jihadis. My favourite's the wrong word to use, but Sarah sent me quite a lot of evidence here. She's got a lovely collection of front pages. Muslim thugs, aged just 12, in knife attack on Brit schoolboy. I can't tell from that headline what paper that was in. I think that's the Star rather than the Sun. But imagine if you put Jewish thugs, aged just 12, in knife attack on Brit schoolboy, or Hindu thugs, or Christian thugs. It just wouldn't happen, would it? And yet, this is what I mean by gaslighting, Joseph. I do this for a flipping living. I'm a professional snowflake. I'm on public enemy number 1 for racists, homophobes, bigots and Islamophobes and, of course, Brexiters. And even I have kind of become a little bit immune to the scale of the problem.
And you and other journalists will be actively targeted by disinformation groups, not just Russia. There'll be other groups, but also trying to make
shut us up.
Well, a bit of shut up, a bit of false. This is what the public think.
Yes, of course.
There will be people deliberately manipulating what the normal person thinks, but what you see and other journalists and things will be distorted even more than what I see. But,
yes, unless you very, very carefully curate your inbox. Although the problem with that is you sometimes sort of wonder what you might be missing. You might be missing nice stuff if your quality filter settings are set really high. You reach a point, and this will sound like I'm doing the big I am, but I'm really not. It's just numbers. It's just counting. You reach a point on Twitter in particular, which is my favourite social media site, where you just have to accept you're never going to see everything. And then when you hit the kind of 250,000 followers mark, you realise you're only going to see a tiny proportion of what is actually sent to you. So whether you're using quality filters or not, the idea that, about 5% probably, and I spend 2 or 3 hours a day on Twitter, including work. I know he's right. Obviously he's right. There's money to be made, and there is power to be accrued by our enemies. I used to laugh at the suggestion that there was a kind of silent war underway between Russia and the rest of the world, but I don't laugh at that anymore. Why else? What does Vladimir Putin gain from Brexit? Answer: a divided enemy. What does Vladimir Putin gain from Donald Trump? Well, probably rather more measurable benefits, actually, in the context of lies that have been told about Trump Tower in Moscow and sundry other scandals that are now so immense that, again, you stop noticing them. But he also gains a divided enemy. Does Vladimir Putin want more than anything else? Division and instability in the West. Why? Because it shores up his position in the East. The question of why people in this country, whether knowingly or unknowingly, have helped him achieve that is one which you're going to need a different breed of politicians and journalists to demand answers to. Theo will be here imminently with an update on PMQs. Before that, Nick in Cheltenham can give us what the producer assures me is a brilliant one-liner about Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred in the Tory party, Nick. What's it going to be?
Well, just very quickly, Boris Johnson's letterbox thing.
Yes.
That was something that Bernard Cribbin said in Carry On Spying.
Was it really?
In 1964.
Oh, gosh.
And 1964 was the year that Boris Johnson was born. So I guess he thought, I wonder which Carry On film came out the year I was born, and it's a special one for him. And it's a joke intended for no Muslim people listening in 1964.
That's a great point. I mean, this idea of, and we mentioned it with Ricky Gervais' reference a moment ago, of going back looking for offence in the past. You need to bear cultural relativism in mind. Yes, you're right, and there he is, transporting a joke that no Muslims would have seen or heard, or hardly any, into a world where it was deliberately offered, the same joke as a deliberate attempt to cause offence to a society in which hundreds of thousands of Muslims live. Nick, thank you. Beth was right. It was brilliant. Speaking of brilliant, Sheila Fogarty will be here at 1 o'clock. Theo Ushwood's keeping us company until
Master
then.
Get in. Down. There we go, James O'Brien. Let's start with Sarah Thornton. She is the chief of the National Police Chiefs Council, the boss of it. And she came out this morning and she said that there was, backing up Cressida Dick, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, a link between the rise in violent crime, murders, homicides, and the cut in the police numbers.
I think we need to ask ourselves why a child would take a knife to use against another child. And I think the causes are complex and we need to get the right people round the table: government, education, health, social services, parents, families, because this is not a problem for the police alone. One of the things we thought about is if this is being called a crisis, an emergency, then we need to respond as if it was a national emergency. Bringing people into COBRA, getting the right people round the table, a senior minister holding all the departments and agencies to account for what they are doing to reduce serious violence.
She was then backed up by the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, who said it was an issue of resource for the police.
I think police resources are very important to deal with this. We've got to do everything we can. I'm absolutely committed to working with the police in doing this, and we have to listen to them when they talk about resources. And that's why, with the meeting we have today with police chiefs, these police chiefs represented the 7 largest forces with the biggest increases in serious violence. They would all say resources are important, and they've welcomed the £1 billion increase, the almost £1 billion this year. And I'm listening to them on what more we can do.
I'm building it up to PMQs because it was the subject of Jeremy Corbyn's 6 questions, James, asking about why the Prime Minister had previously insisted that there wasn't a link between police numbers and violent crime.
The Metropolitan Police Commissioner said yesterday, of course there is some link between violent crime on the streets and police numbers. 21,000 police officers' jobs have been cut. Violent crime is at the highest level since comparative records began. If there are sufficient police numbers, can the Prime Minister please explain why yesterday the Defence Secretary was offering to send in the military to assist with knife crime?
He wasn't, was he? This idea. I mean, what Gavin Williamson did was tell knife crime to shut up and go away. No, what Gavin Williamson did was respond to Cressida Dick saying.
Yes, Cressida Dick was responding to the former Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon.
Yes, so it's just slight. I mean, far be it from me to defend Gavin Williamson from accusations of imbecility.
The champion for Gavin Williamson,
quite as guilty of what Jeremy Corbyn alleges as some might choose to believe.
But it paints this picture, doesn't it, James, that there's this police force which is in crisis, which is having to rely on the army.
You rang us yesterday when we were live on it. Sir Peter Fahey rang in, who was Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, when Theresa May told the Police Federation to shut up and go away.
What did he say?
Well, he said there is actually, if you wanted to be academic about it, an argument to say that there is not a direct correlation or causation, rather, between police cuts and crime going up. But for her still to be singing that tune now, 4 years after that speech, was palpably absurd. Not his phrase, mine. My favourite phrase. Palpably absurd.
Theresa May's tacking away now from talking about there not being...
No kidding.
Well, it's not just... She's now starting, James, to say, well, actually, it's a wider problem, and that underpinning that problem is drugs.
As the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has recognised that the causes of knife crime are complex, she said police alone won't sort this issue out. We can't... we can't arrest our way out of this problem. And I agree, and that's why we need to tackle it across a number of fronts. We also need to ensure that we're understanding the different use and misuse of drugs that is fueling a lot of this crime. And that's why my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has set up the Independent Drugs Misuse Review, which will be led by Dame Carol Black.
What Theresa May doesn't want to happen, because of course she was Home Secretary for 6 years, is for there to be a link between the fall in police numbers and the violent crime, because then it undermines the Conservative Party argument that it is the party of law and order, and that's damaging. So she's trying to say, well, actually, there's another reason now. It's not the cuts, it's drugs, and that's why she went on that tack. Jeremy Corbyn brought up the issue, which is brought up before, in relation to terrorism, that actually you need frontline officers gathering intelligence on the streets of cities across the UK to find out what's going on and to stop these senseless murders.
Perhaps she could listen to Nazir Afzal, former chief prosecutor of Greater Manchester. Tragically, his 17-year-old relative was recently stabbed to death in Birmingham, and he said this: when you reduce police numbers by 21,000, there isn't the intelligence anymore. There isn't the neighbourhood policing anymore. Does the Prime Minister now regret the cuts in police numbers, and will she undertake that on this review they will be restored to the level they were formerly at?
Theresa May's response is that the police have had more resources under her tenureship.
As I've just indicated, we are putting more resources into the police. This year... It's no good members on the opposition benches standing up and saying, no, you're not. It is a fact that more money is being put into the police this year, that more money is being put into the police next year. The real question is not, are we putting more money into the police? Because we are. The real question is, why did the Labour Party oppose that money going into the police?
Theresa May is, of course, technically right. More money is going into the police, but it's going into the counter-terrorism operations and intelligence gathering in that respect, rather than Bobby's on the beat, so to speak, James.
And that concludes this week's PMQs.
Not quite.
Carry on.
Well, there's a split between Sajid Javid and the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, on the issue of how to tackle knife crime. They disagree with each other, and there's a fight over funding. Philip Hammond didn't want to give Sajid Javid more money. He's now going to reconsider that option, and Theresa May, as former Home Secretary, is stuck in the middle. But there is a split also about, and you heard Matt Hancock on LBC earlier in the week saying...
He's quite likeable, wasn't he, Matt Hancock?
He was very... He gave an opinion.
Came across really well.
Yeah,
nice,
he did. Yeah, but he came out and said actually that he thinks, first and foremost, the perpetrators of the crimes are responsible. Whereas Theresa May and others are trying to say, well, actually, it's more complex than that, and you can't simply look at it from the police point of view and the argument that they're making. Yeah. So there's an ideological split there within the cabinet and most senior cabinet ministers, because there's a difference in opinion whether you deal with it right across the board and different departments that are involved in it, or whether actually it's just simply a matter for the police and catching the perpetrators and making it a justice issue.
How are you getting on with that top Nigel Lawson story I told you to research?
Interesting. I had a response from the House of Lords.
Oh, yes.
Because I got in touch with the House of Lords. It took a couple of days for them to get back to me. You have to...
having a snooze.
Sorry?
Nothing.
The reason, in order to be a member of the House of Lords, you have to have tax status. You have to pay taxes in the UK, and therefore, if you don't reside and pay taxes in the UK, then you cannot be a member of the House of Lords. And Lord Ashcroft, had to give up his seat in the House of Lords as a result of that, the 2010 Act. And therefore, Nigel Lawson,
who is selling his house in France,
he's now selling his house in France because he couldn't. Because obviously there'll be changes.
But I think he denies that he was paying tax in France and says he was always going to be moving back, despite applying for permanent residency just last year. He's still very on side with Brexit, though. Have you seen what he said about Brexit, how he describes Brexit now? This is the former chairman of Vote Leave. Vote Leave, of course, the organisation that told us we wouldn't even begin to contemplate leaving until we got all our agreements and treaties in place. Nigel Lawson, the chair of Vote Leave, describes Brexit in an interview with the French newspaper as...
Go on.
A complete mess.
There we have it.
God, imagine how embarrassing it would be if he'd actually been chairman of Vote Leave.
Very.
Thank God. He's glad he campaigned for Remain, isn't he? What with it having turned out to be a complete mess and everything. If you can hear a wry chuckle in the background, do not adjust your sets. It is.
Oh, sorry, was that audible?
Dulcet tones of Sheila Fogarty.